Kitty, come here. Kitty wants to be in the lecture too. Alright, anyway, so what we're going to be talking about in this lecture is we are going to be discussing quickly membranes. So inside of the human body, there are actually quite a few different membranes that are used for various functions. So mainly protection, but also as a barrier for keeping materials in, so to help prevent against desiccation. It's used to help keep parts of your organs put, right, essentially so they don't like rattle around inside of your cavities. But we'll get to that during the lecture. So in this, we are on page 21. So this is the page that is after the page that we took our notes on fluid connective tissue and supporting connective tissue. So we have one blank page on the side there. So all of our notes will fit on that page today. And I'll go through this lecture pretty quickly. There's not a whole lot to talk about in terms of membranes other than to address the different structural components that make up a membrane and the different types of membranes that you're going to see throughout the body. Okay? So let's go ahead and look at our notes as we discuss membranes. There we go. Okay, so membranes. Let's start by defining what a membrane is. So a membrane is only defined as a physical barrier that covers a portion of the body. So our body is essentially a big membrane. If you think about your skin, for example, your skin is a giant membrane that's protecting your body and covering all the other organs that are inside of it, contained within it. All right, but inside of your body, deep to your skin, you do have other membranes that are surrounding various organs inside of the human body. So as we go through our different types of membranes, again, follow along. You also have another picture that I wanted to show you. So we had one that was on another sheet. I gave you guys today a copy of this. It was a little bit better quality, a little bit bigger. So go ahead and use that one. Don't glue it in yet. I'll show you where to glue it. But this is what we're going to be looking at for part of our lecture today. All right, so membranes are physical barriers that cover portions of the body. Okay. So this is why we got to it last. All right, we talked about epithelium, the tissue that's lining parts of the body. All right. And we talked about connective tissue. Well, to build a membrane, you have to have both of those together. Okay, so you have to have epithelium, you have to have connective tissue that are working together. So again, all of your membranes are considered an organ. They're made up of two different tissue types, right, that are working together to carry out a particular function. So again, these membranes are made up of epithelial lining cells supported by the connective tissue that they are lying on top of. So that basal lamina and then the connective tissue that is below it. So remember, membranes are made up of both epithelium and connective tissue. So there are four types of membranes that build the body. Okay, so four types of membranes that are found inside the body. So the first type of membrane that we're going to talk about is called a mucous membrane, or a mucosa. You've probably heard that term before, especially if you watch like House or something. They say that all the time. All right, so mucosa is a mucous membrane. Okay, so a mucous membrane is generally a type of membrane that's going to have an epithelial glandular cell that is going to produce mucus. So a lot of these different types of membranes are going to have cells that relate to their name or relate to the secretion that they produce. So a mucous membrane. Okay, mucous membranes are defined as those that line passages that have external connections. And by external connection, that means they're exposed to the outside. Okay, so you have mucous membranes that line essentially all of your digestive tract. Your digestive tract is exposed to the outside, right? As I'm opening my mouth, right, I'm literally exposing the inside of my body to the outside. You are nothing but a giant donut, right? That inside, that digestive system is wrapping you down. Okay, that is outside world. So mucous membranes line these that have external connections. So for most mucosae, you have moist epithelial surface, right? So the outside surface is very wet, right? Because you have that mucus secretion that's being produced by those epithelial cells. So that moist epithelial surface is there to do two things. One, it reduces friction, right? So stuff running against the mucus doesn't end up scathing and being abrasive and damaging it. So it helps that. But also, it's important because it helps increase secretions overall with exchange of secretions with that loose connective tissue. All right, so by reducing the friction and increasing secretions, you're able to allow this mucosa to carry material very quickly. So with this, that loose connective tissue is actually going to be sitting, or loose connective tissue is actually going to be sitting under most of your mucous membranes. So that's what we saw when we were looking at our trachea, right? We had loose connective tissue that was below that, so areolar connective tissue or loose connective tissue below that. And so that actual layer was allowing us to have a connective point that could allow us for rapid movement of materials in and out. Okay, so our loose connective tissue underneath that. Okay. So again, you're going to find this on anywhere that's exposed to the outside surface. So digestive system, your urinary system, respiratory system, and reproductive systems. Those 4 areas are going to be surrounded by mucous membranes. Okay, so like the inside of your mouth is lined with mucous membranes. They're producing mucosa, so part of your saliva, stuff like that. So again, those are all going to be found covered with mucous membrane. Okay, mucosa. So you got all these mucous membranes that are producing all of this slime, okay, but you also have other membranes, okay. So the second type of membrane we're going to be talking about is called a serous membrane, or serous membrane. Serous membranes are membranes that line cavities, but this cavity is not exposed to an outside, okay, so it stays within the body, so there's no external exposure, okay. So when we talked about our body cavities earlier on, right, we talked about our abdominal cavity, our pelvic cavity, our peritoneum, all right, so all of those areas that are lined with this tissue, okay, those are serous membrane tissues. So your serous membrane, again, it's very much like a mucous membrane in the sense that there is fluid around it to help reduce friction, okay, but it's a lot thinner than what we're going to actually see with our other epithelium. Okay, so serous membranes are actually really thin. Okay? And it's thin, but really strong and dense. So it's a tough stuff, right? It's thin, but very strong. It does have a fluid coating like a mucous membrane, but it's more of a kind of a serous excretion. It's going to be a lot thinner, more watery. So with our this, you do have 2 sides to your membrane. Okay? So any membrane that's lining the outside of a surface, right, you're going to have a side that is going to be facing a lumen or an open area, and you're going to have a side that's going to be directly attached to part of the tissue. Okay, so the parietal portion of any cavity, we call that that covers the cavity, right? So that's the side that's facing the cavity. Okay, so that's kind of most of the time the apical side of our lining tissue. So the parietal side or portion of that covers the cavity. The visceral portion of your connective tissue membrane here is called, or the serosa, another term for it. So or visceral, serosa means deep. Essentially what that's going to be doing is cover, or anything visceral covers an organ. So organs, right, are covered by visceral layers. Okay, so this is covering your organ. So with your parietal portion, again, you're covering the cavity, so you're lining that tissue there. Visceral portion is the part that is lining and around your organ. Alright, so if you want me to draw that in class, I can show that to you as well to give you guys some extra help with that. Okay. So with inside of serous membranes, there are actually 3 different types of serous membranes. Alright, those are all directed to what organs they are covering and related to. Okay. So the first type of serosal membrane is called the pleura, P-L-E-U-R-A. Pleura refers to anything related to the lungs. So that pleura prefix mean, or pleural root means lungs. Okay. So it lines your pleural cavity and it lines the outside of your lungs. Okay, so your pleural membrane is a serous membrane that lines your lungs. You have a peritoneum. Peritoneum is going to be lining the peritoneal organs of the abdomen. So part of your abdominal cavity as well as part of your pelvic cavity. But also your peritoneum is going to be covering all parts of your abdomen. So all of the inside of your abdomen as well as the organs that are found there are surrounded by peritoneum. Okay. So when we do our cat dissection, that's one thing we got to cut through a little bit later is your peritoneum. So that's P-E-R-I. Remember, peri means around. So peritoneum is around your organs. Okay. And then the last one is your pericardium. So your pericardium is going to be lining your pericardial cavity as well as lining the outside of your heart. Okay, so again, these membranes are thin but strong. They keep your organs in place, and they are surrounding both the organ as well as surrounding the actual side of the cavity. Okay, so again, all of that's going to be apical side is facing the inside. Okay, but then you have that basal layer that's surrounding on that membrane that's going to be connecting everything together. Okay. All right, let's go to our last 2 types. All right, the third type that you're going to have is called cutaneous. A cutaneous membrane is one that covers the skin. All right, essentially that's your skin, your cutaneous membrane. Anything cutaneous refers to skin. So your cutaneous membrane is the skin, it's the surface of the body. As you know, the skin is very thick, it's waterproof, and it's generally dry. Right? It's not a super wet membrane. Sure, you're producing oil, sure, you're producing sweat, but overall, it's a very, very moist membrane. Excuse me. Sleep. Yeah. Alright, and then our last type of membrane, okay, is called synovial membranes. And synovial membranes are actually really complicated structurally. That's why I gave you the diagram, but I want to talk about kind of their main function. All right, synovial membranes, these line moving joints. So anywhere you have a joint, like in your hand, for example, like here I've got my hand. So anywhere I have a joint, like here in my knuckle, that's actually a synovial joint, right? That means it's going to contain synovial fluid and a synovial membrane. Okay, so if I flex these, right, I'm moving a synovial joint. All right, so these line those moving joints. And so all of your synovial joints are producing all the time synovial fluid, right? And that's functioning as a lubricant so that you can move easily. So individuals that are, say, that are older that have arthritis, sometimes they don't produce as much synovial fluid as they need in order to function normally, or they have reduced cartilage because the cartilage in there is thin or worn away, or they have inflammation, so they have a lot of scar tissue that's built up that makes it difficult to move around that membrane. Okay, but essentially what this is doing is allowing you to protect the ends of your bone. Okay, so you use the synovial tissue to help make sure that your bones are lubricated, they're not going to be damaging themselves, right, and they're going to be hopefully protected. The other thing that's unique about synovial membranes is they lack really true layer of epithelium, and we'll look at the diagram to see that. So like I said before, you guys got a second sheet today that has another foldable. Again, another diagram of what we're trying to see here with our fluid connective tissue, or with our membranes, sorry, with the different fluids that are there and what they look like structurally. So if you get that out, it looks like this image right here. So if I zoom in on it, right, I just glued it to one side so I could fold it away and look at my notes underneath. Right, we have our 4 different types of membranes. Okay. So our first type of membrane we have up here, again, this is the structure, the different layers that are there. So you have this mucous membrane, you have cells that are producing the material. Here it looks like we're producing it either using apocrine secretion or merocrine secretion. Okay, more apocrine probably. Alright, so we're producing this material, it's being secreted to the side here. This is the apical side, it's going to be open to our duct or wherever else we're opening. Alright, so this mucosal membrane, it's made up of epithelium, and then you have this loose propina, which is essentially loose connective tissue that's underneath that. So again, a loose area that's holding this mucous membrane down. Serous membrane, again, it's going to be mostly squamous epithelium, super thin but still really strong. It's going to be sitting on this loose connective tissue, right, and it's going to be lining all the internal organs. So here we've got the kind that's going to be lining the abdominal cavity. Remember, this is your peritoneum, so your peritoneal lining membrane. Okay. Cutaneous refers to skin. So again, you have your epithelial layer at the top, you have loose connective tissue underneath, and then dense irregular connective tissue below that. Excuse me, I got too many mucosal secretions. Okay. So you have that cutaneous membrane that's present here. Alright, then at the bottom you have your synovial membrane. So here it has lined out all the different synovial tissues that are going to be present in here. Right, and there's quite a bit that's going on. Okay, you have your hyaline cartilage that's on the outside. You have the synovial fluid that's filling in the middle, the space. And essentially what this is forming is kind of a capsule, right? An area that's going to be containing this different tissue. So you have bone on each side, again your connective tissue between your, which is made of connective tissue. Then you have the hyaline cartilage that's between. So then you have the fluid here. So inside of this capsule membrane, right, that you're going to have a lot of different tissues that are present. So you have adipocytes that are there to provide extra cushion, support, and energy. Loose connective tissue that's going to hold some blood vessels together, capillaries together. Right, and epithelium that's going to be lining the inside, but it doesn't necessarily like form a really good layer. Okay, it's kind of randomly sitting on the top. All right, so this whole thing forms your synovial membrane. So one question you might get on your test is asking you guys to diagram this particular image of the synovial joint, where I might ask you to label the different parts of the synovial membrane. So make sure that you look at that. Alright, so again, just to review really fast, we have our membranes. Membranes are lining different parts of our body. The 4 types of membranes that we're going to have are mucosous membranes, or mucosal, or mucosi, or mucous membranes, serous membranes that are generally producing kind of more of a liquidy excretion, so not so much mucousy or thick, but very, very loose. We have cutaneous membranes, it's your skin, and then synovial membranes are membranes that are producing synovial fluid, alright, again, around a joint, so like all of my knuckles. Okay. Alright, so if we, just to review again, another thing you want to make sure that you're looking at and that you're paying attention to while you are studying this material is, again, this is it for our next test. So the materials that are up through membranes, that's our end of our histology unit. Because we're going to address muscle tissue and we're going to address nervous tissue later when we talk about those 2 individual systems, I want to focus on those more there instead of giving you more material now. So again, all of our notes are fair game. That includes everything we've done from the very beginning. That's all stuff that could come back. So I want to tell you now to make sure to go back and start reviewing everything so it's not a surprise. So you might get a question again about where I'm going to ask you guys stuff on listing all the parts of a homeostatic regulatory system, or I might ask you guys about individual questions of epithelial cells. All of that stuff is fair game. So make sure that you review that material because it's going to keep coming back. It's never going to go away. We're going to continue to address it throughout the entire year. So again, if you guys have questions or issues in class, feel free to email me. I will probably try to get back to you. So again, just let me know if there's more issues, or if not, when I see you guys on in class next, just ask, and I'll be more than happy to answer any questions you have. Okay? So study hard. I'm sure you'll do fine. Just keep it up. Okay. Good luck.